Quotations from myself, segment 91, quotation number 1066. If a man is a product of his environment, and myths are creation of man, then this or that particular environment or geography must provide the key to the understanding of the origins of this or that particular mythology. Let's begin with the Bible, this combination of Judeo-Christian myths central to the Western mythological tradition. The biblical stories for creation and fall of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, to the death and resurrection of Christ in Judea, took place in the area of Middle East called sometimes the Fertile Crescent. The slim band of the livable space, winding its precarious way through the inhospitable mountains and deadly deserts, and which can be envisaged by following the journey of Abraham beginning at Ur of Chaldeans, Persian Gulf, going up north along the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, then turning at Haran south and continues through Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine, Canaan, until it reaches its final destination, Egypt. The area just described is an unsettling combination of narrow, fertile valleys, periodically flooded by rivers, surrounded by arid, naked mountains and parched, forbidding deserts. It is a land of extreme and disturbing contrast, of small and vulnerable oases in the midst of the huge and ominous wilderness, of the island of million honey lost in a vast ocean of hunger and thirst. It is a land that creates life and brings death, and where hell is just around the corner from paradise. In a land like this, there is nothing to intercede between man and nature God. The utter desolation of the death-breathing desert removes all illusion of self-sufficiency, and only God, who is as faceless and as omnipresent as the desert itself, is the sole possible giver of life and protector from death. And since there is no other God, with the exception of Satan, who could possibly be imagined in such a singularly forbidding homogeneity of seemingly infinite desert, the relationship solitary God and lonely man is the stuff the biblical myths are made of. In its religious mythological universe, the two central factors of the region, the desert and the well, assume the symbolic meaning, the desert signifying the wrath of God, and the water well his mercy and grace, with his rest being as vast as the desert itself, while the grace is as rare as wells in it. Consequently, the suffering of man, because it is so prevalent in such condition, is taken for granted, believed to be deserved, while the rare happiness is greeted as undeserved mercy as the gift of the forgiving God. And so, throughout the monotheistic trinity of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, each being but a different hypostasis of the essentially the same religion, coming out of the same geographical location in the Middle East, the man longing for well of hope in a desert of despair, and God absolute power to satisfy or to frustrate, it remains the principal mythological leitmotif. Second only to the Bible in its importance to the Western mythological tradition, stand unquestionably the mythology of ancient Greece. But its geographical setting, the soil from which the Olympian gods, titans, and heroes have sprung, bear little resemblance to the sense which gave us Jehovah a patriarch. The territory of the ancient Greece consisted of the three parts: the mainland Greece occupying the southern part of Balkan Peninsula and Peloponnesus, numerous islands of the Aegean and Ionian Sea, and the west coast of Asia Minor called Ionia. The landscape of the mainland Greece is very diverse. Mountain alternates with plains and river valleys. Flora and fauna of the ancient Greece were rich and varied. Thick forests covered the mountains. The forests were full of wild animals, lions, bears, wolves, etc. And though on the whole nature was generous to man, the north was cold in the winter and south hot in the summer. The sea was both inviting and frightening, the permanent source of delight and danger, where the groves, streams, mountains were full of the enchanting and menacing mystery. In the sea, the islands sparkled abundantly everywhere. Each one is somewhat different from the rest, were close enough to ensure the unity, and yet far enough to allow to keep the distance. And finally, the Ionia provided a conduit through which Eastern mythological tradition could enter the Greek world for mixing and cross-pollination. All this served as a perfect background for the colorful and imaginative poetry of the Greek mythology. It is also not surprising that such a tremendous diversity of the environment has produced equally numerous variety of deities. A true reflection of this environment, who, unlike the metaphysical and disembodied Jehovah of empty desert, has names, faces, bodies, and in all their habits and emotions were hardly distinguishable from man. The main difference was in immortality, but even this gap could be bridged since God had the power to grant it to men and thus make them equal to gods. Naturally, the relationship between such gods and men were quite different from those between Hebrews and their one and only God. The similarity provided a lot of room for interaction and negotiation. Because of the multiplicity of gods, there was plenty of opportunities to form alliances, some of them to protect oneself from the other. And all this interaction and negotiations, coexistence and interdependence of man and God, which in essence was a reflection of relationship between the ancient Greeks and their environment, have made the Greek mythology what it is. The creation of yet another great mythology, that are at the root of Western civilization, those of Scandinavia and Northern Europe, took place in an environment which unlike both the Middle East and Greece. From the bleak heartland of Scandinavia, through the endless, dense, almost impenetrable forests and impassable swamps of the northern and middle Europe, till the unsurmountable alpine peaks, Europe of the ancient times was harsh and demanding land to live on. The long cold winters has to be endured, and the wet summer to bear with. There was a game in the forest and fish in lake and rivers, but the soil was poor, sun and worms rare, and only the starches could survive. All this hardship and struggle with nature was reflected in Northern and Teutonic myth, with their fierce and cruel gods and fearless, mighty, larger-than-life heroes. Finally, to sum up, if one agrees that gods and men interrelationship, which is what the ancient myths are all about, are but a symbolic reflection of nature as men struggle to survive within it, then it is clear that since nature is not one uniform, generic abstractive philosopher, but a living reality different everywhere, the specific geographical region of the world has produced, of necessity, the specifically different mythologies, uniquely suited to this or that particular environment. Next, I will try to explore the perils and pitfalls of the transplantation and adoption by the people whose way of life had been shaped by a particular geography and climate, of the mythology native to the drastically dissimilar environment. And I will use an example, the stormy love-hate relationship between Judaism, Christianity on one side, and the inhabitants of European continent on the other.